I love running this company. I love running it because of the people I deal with. There's such a great team of people.
From a career perspective, it's the best move I ever did. I'm enjoying the work. I'm currently on a project and booked for another project soon.
It's given me the opportunity to work with lots of different types of technology and explore some stuff that I maybe only dabbled in at university or before.
SSW is a company that makes enterprise software solutions, and that's what we do. We build software for clients on demand. We build bespoke solutions using the latest technology and the latest best practices.
I've been involved in the development of some mining software, been involved in the development of software for a legal firm, and everything in between there. Even in just under 2 years, I've been working across so many different projects.
We play as hard as we work. You know, it's just a really great place to come into, and I always look forward to coming to work.
So since I've been working here, I've really been pushed, and that's what I wanted. You come to a place where you're working with a team of just absolute weapons. We've got the best in the business here, and that's an exciting place to be.
The guys are very passionate about doing things right the first time. We share our best practices with the community and with our clients and with others. Using conferences, we speak at events, and also we have the SSW rules, which is a huge archive of the best way to do everything.
The management here is totally approachable. So if you have a better way of doing it, or you know of a better method, then everything is up for discussion. As an example, say authentication. So a lot of the guys are building authentication into their apps, and they've been through many different ways of doing that. So generally what ends up happening or coming from that is a discussion around what's the best way of doing it. And we come to a decision based on industry best practice, as well as our own experiences on what the best method and approach is. And that then turns into a rule that we have on our rules.ssw.com.au website.
What really defines this company and make it work is the fact that we have people that are able to share their knowledge and solve complex problems together. It's a wide variety of different clients, different structures, different sizes, different industries, and different technologies as well.
The world we live in now is just so many light years above the world that we were working with even 5 years ago. We get into lots of topics deeply, and it's fascinating how it all works and why it works. You know, we get paid to make fancy jigsaw puzzles.
Access granted.
Developing software is a unique opportunity to be creative and technical at the same time. It gives you the opportunity to solve problems. It gives you the opportunity to exercise and flex your mental muscles by solving problems and figuring things out, while also being creative.
You can feel that energy when you come into the office. There's a really good vibe and connection between everybody who works together here. It's really collaborative, and we even have the tools for doing that collaboration now as well through Microsoft Teams. We always try and team up in pairs where possible for client work. 2 heads are always better than 1.
I believe being a developer, a good developer is writing good quality code. But being a great consultant, which we are at SSW, is half-half between technical skills and communication. That's what makes us different on the market. That's what gives us our edge, because we're capable of not only doing great work in terms of technical skills, but also bringing value and bringing our insight based on our experience, saying, oh, to solve this problem, I would recommend you going that way or this way. And bringing that value, that strategic value to a client, and being able to phrase it, not only having it in your head, but phrasing it to give them options.
And we make sure that people are communicating internally with each other in a way that is professional and succinct, and we make sure that that's the way that we communicate with our customers as well.
And I want to show you a few ways that make email more useful.
People that want to improve their communication through public speaking can do that through the conferences that we're involved in. They can do it through SSW TV.
You might actually not need to go native, guys.
We have a lot of videos that kind of help get your face out there, to get your name out there. We also have a really good social media presence. We have a great marketing team that takes care of that.
We are client-facing all the time. There's no way to work at SSW and just be behind the desk and not talk to anyone. Every day you have to communicate. So that brings communication as a core skill of what you become. And some people develop it a way further, like by doing public speaking. We have awesome speakers. I think NDC videos prove that. We have awesome tech tips and even conferences given by SSW people. I think we had like 6 or 7 this year, so that's pretty huge.
One of the exciting things about working here is we're always on the bleeding edge of technology. We're always trying to reach out to those new projects. What are other people doing? What's the next best thing? I think Adam being a Microsoft Regional Director really gives us a bit of an edge in that regard as well, because he usually knows what's in the pipeline before other people do.
We've had many younger guys come through SSW, and in a few short years, they've become absolutely amazing developers.
You can have guys with just a few years of experience and they're building software that's affecting tens of thousands of users with some guidance of the software architects. It just works. Like, it's amazing. You build something and you test it that you can enter an order, and then all of a sudden you can enter thousands of orders like in seconds. It's just incredible. We couldn't do that a few years ago.
We have a couple of different ways that we socialise. Every lunchtime, we're killing each other in board games, which is always good.
It's interesting because those games, are about psychology. That's very interesting. You learn a lot about people.
The most exciting thing that we do is obviously our company retreats. We go away for a weekend after doing a brainstorming session. On the Friday, we all work together as a group and work out, problems for the company itself. We always try and keep the activities a little bit different to make it a bit of fun.
It's just a great weekend all around.
People that come to work here want to be at that level of globally recognized expertise that some of the best guys at SSW are at. And even if you're not at that stage now, I think that a lot of people that come to work here are inspired by that.
A lot of clients come to us with maybe a general idea of what they want. And you can use your expertise and past experience to really inform their decisions and make sure that they're developing the best possible product. I really enjoyed that part of it. I think that would be very satisfying for anyone who's been working on maintaining an old piece of software or maintaining an old system. If they could come and maybe work on some new greenfields projects and potentially influence the way that product comes out at the other end.
You can come up with cool designs, you can come up with new solutions, you can come up with elegant ways of solving problems that haven't really been done before, and plus you get to build something. And often the projects that we're engaged with, you get to build something that's going to make a difference.
People want more stuff automated, they want richer interfaces, they want bot interfaces. The architecture keeps expanding, the knowledge of Azure keeps growing. Like, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to get better. I'm still trying to make solutions quicker, more maintainable, cheaper, and there's a long way to go.
like true competitive personality only comes out on retreats. Like we go on a bush walk, or we play tennis, or we go swimming, or we go go-karting, and all of a sudden he's just like, get out of the way!
Thank you very much for coming in, guys. I hope you all enjoyed your rides today, and I hope we see you all again, guys.
To SSW. ChatGPT now has a body. Fixing bugs just got so easy. And Elon Musk has started another company. All this and more in this month's Tech News. I'm Adam Kogan. Let's get into it. G'day team, Adam Kogan here for this month's SSW Tech News, July 2023. I'm just back from Europe and we've got a great evening ahead of us. First up we will have Matt Goldman, who will be presenting Beyond Passwords, the future and present of authentication. Now I'm not sure if he's going to plug himself, he might, but I just thought I'd let you know that his book on Maui just got released. He must be a very proud boy. I'm sure he might mention that tonight. Now, the first piece of news will be ChatGPT. And of course, it gets better. I use it continually all day long. I notice that my user experience is slightly different to some of the other guys here. I have it as my icon, and it's on the front screen of my phone, the very front screen. And so I'm using it multiple times every day. Now they have released something called a code interpreter. So if you have a look over here, what is this code interpreter? Well, it's pretty damn cool. You need GPT-4, which I wouldn't personally use GPT-3 because it's not reliable and it's scary when you're not sure if the answer is good. GPT-4 is almost always reliable, and it has this new plugin called a code interpreter. Just came out, and it will do fancy things. So you can upload a file, markdown file, an Excel file, and then ask it a question. We have a survey that we send out to all 100 employees every month, every week. So you can put that Excel file into code interpreter and say, give me a summary. Makes charts, it does some magical stuff. It's really good. Now, you can ask it a question like this. A brick weighs 30% of a brick plus 5 GPUs. There are 100 bricks and 200 GPUs in a metric ton. How much does a brick weigh? So it will give you the answer and tell you that the answer was 7.8. If you want to know how it did it, you could click on this and it'll show you the Python script that it wrote and ran. So damn cool, hey? All right, now, next piece of news, ChatGPT gets a body. So apparently, you will be able to buy this guy, and this thing can, this robot, maybe you have it in your office, and it will walk around and do tasks, automated tasks. So it can wipe down a desk. It can, oh, this is going to be crazy. We don't know how much it's going to cost yet, but it's going to be fun. I think it'd be fun, it'd be cool. Maybe you can get it to walk to the front door and open it up and let somebody in. Or you could, what else could you do? Ask it to make you a coffee. That would be a bit of fun. Just deliver something. Go and pick up something from the printer. I wouldn't mind that one. Oh, look, there it is. It can open a door. So this is going to be, let's hope it's only a couple of grand and then everybody will buy one. All right. So announcing .NET MAUI extension for Visual Studio Code. Now, we are doing a lot more MAUI work now since it's taken over from Xamarin. And we now have an extension, and this extension is going to really accelerate the use of MAUI. So this is very, very good news. The .NET developers here are excited by this. This is great news. So now we have that. So if you're going to be doing mobile development, check out MAUI and check out this extension. It's the best experience. Next piece of news, this Microsoft DevBox. So, we've got things like code spaces and stuff. They work in VS Code. This is a much more complete solution where it will work with Visual Studio, not just VS Code. You could potentially have a very low-powered machine that's not good enough to do real development work and have it powered by a Microsoft DevBox, which is a cloud solution. So that should be good. That's worth checking out. Next piece of news is this caching improvement to ASP.NET Core. The best improvement you can ever get to your software is caching. Like that will save it from, you know, hitting a database, which is a very expensive call. Now, typically, that's built into .NET, but if you wanted to do distributed caching, things get a little bit more hairy, the code gets a bit more messy. Now Microsoft have given you a bit of a solution. You can have a look through here. They tell you the way to get it going. As an example, if you're using Redis for caching, you can copy this C# file. You'll then now have it in your project. You'll come down here, refer to Microsoft extensions.caching.distributed, and then all of a sudden your code is way, way simpler. So this is a very useful improvement for your enterprise solutions if you want it to run real fast and be cached. Next piece of news, oh my goodness. Azure AD, the thing we know and love and hate sometimes, is being renamed to Microsoft Entra ID. Wow. This is something we have known for more than 30 years. We've grown to, look, Azure AD has been so successful. And on premises, we use Active Directory, AD. This took me by a big surprise. And now we're going to spend most of our time, every time someone says Azure AD or AAD, you'll be correcting them to say it's now called Entra ID. Oh, that's going to be painful. All right. Now, naming things is never easy. Why have they done this? Well, I can't imagine a lot of people are going to be happy about this. You can see people in the comments, this is a joke, right? What we already know what it is. And they're going to rename it. And congratulations on a boneheaded rebranding. Now, there is actually a point to this. This guy kind of sums it up a little bit. He says, look, you've got Active Directory, you've got Azure Active Directory, you've got Azure, you've got AD hosted in Azure, you've got Azure AD Directory Services. All these should be under one brand. So, you know, this guy's happy because you have Entra ID and they have these sub-functionalities. I guess they could have named AD, which they didn't rename, but they could have renamed that Entra ID on premises. But they didn't. They didn't touch that one. This is only affecting cloud services. Anyway, that's something that's important for us to know. Next piece of news. All right, let's talk about this thing. This is released by Google. It is a Chrome extension. It is not a Chromium extension. And it is super cool. So you know in the past tech news how I've been saying, oh, you got to use Edge, you know, all the Bing Chat AI improvements. Well, all right, changing my mind. You have to now use Chrome because you want this cool extension. And, you know, reproducing a bug is painful. Sometimes as a developer, if you want to, you know, avoid some work, you can ask them to repro the problem, and it's hard for them to document it. Now, if you ask them to repro the problem, it's going to be easy. They just have this extension, they record it, and it's boom. It's a great automated test, kind of. Now, there's a little bit of a run through here. This page is a bit better. This is the extension, the actual extension on Developer Chrome, and it's brand new. So let's have a look at how you use this thing, because it's got a little bit of info here. So say you've got this coffee ordering page, and let's have a look at this. I might just full screen it and play it. So let's have a look. Let's play. All right, good. So he clicks on this. What's he doing? He's got 2 in the cart. He's going to delete one, delete. Now he's got 1 in the cart, $19. He logs in. And what's going to happen now? He clicks that button, he comes here, and now there's 0 in the cart. So maybe he's complaining, I'm not sure, but maybe he's complaining that he lost his item in the cart when he logged in or something. But you get this nice description here of what you just did. And here is the process of using it. On the right-hand screen here, you'd start a new recording, give it a name, come down here. Every time you're doing something on the left-hand side on the web page, it's recording every step. And you do more steps, and then you'll eventually press end recording. So that's very cool. You've got a nice recorded process there. And then to replay it, let's press replay. Watch this. Let me just go full screen. Look how fast. So you just press replay, boom. Okay. Now, and then you could give that to developer. You could potentially even use it for something else. Let's just say you log into the, say the Qantas website to book a flight, and you go through and you select a whole lot of different things. You give your preferences, or you say I want a script for picking the Melbourne flight. You could just double click on this and it just does all that and gets you to the point where you want to review it and pay or something like that. There's lots of uses for this. This is super cool. I really like it. All right, next piece of news, JetBrains. Now, JetBrains are a tool that I'm seeing more and more with our developers. In fact, one of our offices, apparently 50% of the developers are now using JetBrains with Visual Studio at the same time. Because, you know, Visual Studio has a few bugs, JetBrains has a few bugs. You know, they're using it in different cases. So if you come in here, the product that a lot of people love is called Rider, okay? Especially on huge projects, that's quite good. Now, what it doesn't have is Copilot. Well, there's an update to that. Now it does have Copilot. It's called AI Assistant. So looking down here, you'll see that you can basically ask it some questions. It'll give you some code. You can put the code in. It's pretty cool. And that is something that's worth checking out. It's good to see, you know, pushing Microsoft at the same time as well. All right, last piece of news, a bit of fun. XAI, all right, this is Elon Musk's new company. Remember when Elon Musk was telling everyone that we should pause AI for 6 months? A lot of people were a fan of that as well. Well, surprising, he's got his own company doing the same thing, and it looks, well, we don't exactly know what it's doing yet, but he's doing something cool, and well, we'll see. But it does have overtones of OpenAI, which he was also part of, but now obviously he is pushing this thing. Okay, I wonder if he would have been pushing this thing if we had a paused AI. And that's it for the July Tech News. We've got lots of videos here, the past news, lots of cool videos, other rules. You can see a whole bunch of them. Thank you for all the subscribers we have. We've got 37,000, pretty impressed by that. And I will see you in the next one. This is Adam Kogan signing off for SSW TV.
Thank you, Adam. Wow, what a awesome month of news. As you probably guessed from the first story in the news, a very big month for me. So that was awesome. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming out this evening to listen to my talk. I'm going to be talking about beyond passwords, the future and present of authentication. So quick question. Who loves passwords? One? Who really loves passwords? Okay, so yeah, look, we don't love passwords. You know, we don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh, I can't wait to enter some passwords today. So we're going to talk about that this evening and how you can get rid of them. Maybe not yet, but you know, certainly reduce them and do something better a lot of the time. So a little bit about me. My name's Matt. They call me Goldie around here. As you saw from the news, I'm the author of a book called .NET MAUI in Action. It's available now, just came out in print 2 days ago. I am a big fan of motorcycles. I'm a home brewer, and I am an Ironman. That was 10 years ago now, and there's no way I could do that now. So, but I still hold on to that past glory a bit too much. The first thing I want to tell you about is our app that we have here called SSW Rewards. If you scan this QR code, it will take you to either the Google Play Store or the iOS App Store. It will detect what OS you've got it. And what you can do is you can install this app and you can get points. You can get those points by submitting feedback at the end of this talk. You can get points by asking anyone you see in an SSW t-shirt to scan their QR code. And when you get enough points, you can win some cool prizes like a Mi Band. If you want to see what that is, you can ask Adam. He's got one on his wrist. If you're in the audience here in Sydney, you can win some cool Keep Cups, and you can go into draws to win some prizes and cool stuff like that. So yeah, grab the app, SSW Rewards, and it's free, and get some cool swag. So I want to start by saying that passwords are not fit for purpose. Now, I'm sure that someone much smarter than me has said that, but I couldn't find a quote, so I just said it myself. But passwords are really not fit for purpose. They were invented for a specific reason, and that was back in the 1960s when we had computers that were the size of this room, and people had to compete for time on these machines for running experiments. They needed a way of making sure that each other's experiments didn't interfere with each other, and make sure that my data didn't contaminate your data, and so on and so forth. So they came up with this system of having a password. So you use the password and you get access to your data in your session and your experiments. That was obviously 60 years ago, and now we use them for everything. They're not suited to the purpose that we're using them for now. And we've thought of some things that are better, but we still have a need for them now, and I'm going to explain a bit about that as we go. So what exactly is the problem? Well, just some stats here. Over 80% of data breaches are due to poor password security. That's from Verizon. And we're going to look a little bit about what poor password security means and what some of the problems are. The average employee manages over 200 passwords. Now, this statistic comes from LastPass, and if you know who they are, they had a breach recently. Let's not worry about that. But they're an enterprise password manager and personal. So it's kind of, this is a little bit of a loaded statistic, but it is true, right? We all manage a lot of passwords, and they all need to be unique for reasons that we'll see shortly. It's a problem. It's a big cognitive burden. In fact, we can't manage mentally 200 good, unique passwords. It's just impossible. So if you're not using a password manager, you're in trouble. This one from Google: more than 2/3 of people reuse the same password for more than one account. Now, being honest, who here uses a password that's the same one for more than one account? That is about 99% of people here in the Sydney audience. Who knows why that's a problem? Anyone? I'll tell you an anecdote. I'll tell you a story. Does anyone remember about 2010, maybe 2011, there was a really big breach at LinkedIn. Their user password database got leaked. There's a couple of nods here in the audience. Now, there was a website that was set up by a couple of guys in the US called LeakedIn. And what you could do is you could go into this website and you could type in your email address, and it would tell you whether or not you were in the breach. And I remember I was sitting in the office at the time, not here at SSW. This was another organization, and I was talking about this, and I'd read an article about it, and I was telling everyone, go to LinkedIn and see if your account was compromised. And a few people were doing it, and I spoke to one person who was very, very senior. Later went on to become IT director of this organization, and I remember saying, are you not going to do it? She said, I don't care. They get my LinkedIn account. I don't really use it, whatever. I said, what about every other account that you use the same username and password for? And she looked at me, and then her face went completely white. She rushed over to her computer and went to check and change her password. So this is the thing, reusing passwords is bad for that very obvious reason. I'm sure everyone has a story along those lines for that one. So just to summarize some of the issues with passwords, they are weak and vulnerable to brute force, if we can remember them. They're vulnerable to phishing or social engineering. Does anyone know what that means? What phishing and social engineering are? There's 1, 2, Agree? Everyone's getting a bit more bold. So pretty much everyone here understands that. So phishing is where you pretend to be a service that you want to get a password for, and you try to convince someone to give you their credentials by convincing them that you are that service. That is a form of social engineering. Social engineering more broadly is the practice of rather than trying to break the computer security, you break the human security. And we are the weak link, and you know, it is a much easier thing to do, especially when you consider if you cast a wide net, there's a lot of people and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. They get reused. We've already seen why that's a problem. They're vulnerable to breaches. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, like the case of LinkedIn, if your password is in a database somewhere and that database gets breached and leaked, your password is exposed. Now, of course, it's a very good practice to hash, salt, encrypt your passwords, of course, but it doesn't always help. And I'll show you why shortly. But to give you another example, in fact, I'll come back to that example when I show you a cool little graphic in a minute. So some more problems. They're vulnerable to keylogging. So keylogging is you can potentially install some software or malware, really is what it is, on a computer, and you can log every keystroke that someone enters. And obviously you're going to get a lot of data, but it's trivial really to filter that and get the username and password out of it. Especially when you look for patterns like keystrokes, tab, keystrokes, enter, something like that, right? So it's, you know, getting the passwords out of it is trivial. And you know, not really that big an issue now, but you know, if you think back to the 2000s when we used to go to internet cafes, who used to go to an internet cafe? Yeah, a few people. Yeah. So obviously that's a completely untrusted computer. So that's a really bad scenario to be putting in usernames and passwords. They're vulnerable to shoulder surfing. Who knows what shoulder surfing is? Anyone? Yeah. Few people. So if what it is if you're typing in your password, I can sneakily go over your shoulder and see what you're typing in. So that's obviously not great. They're not accessible. So there is a standard called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the WCAG. This is a standard for making websites and web applications accessible. And it's a really, really great standard, and you should do your best to familiarize yourself with it if you can. It defines all kinds of things to improve the accessibility of your application or your site for people with various accessibility constraints. So it says specifically not to use a cognitive test as a method of authenticating a user unless you also provide another method of authenticating the user and you offer all kinds of other ways of letting them enter that password. So a password is a cognitive test. In the test is for you to remember something specific. In fact, just to elaborate on that, authentication, the process of proving that you are authentic, proving that you are who you say you are, means that you have to, it's about proof of ownership, or it's about proof of who you are. And that's generally done by one of three methods. By proving something you know, like a password, something you have, like an RSA key or a token or an authenticator app, or something you are in the case of biometrics. So those are the kind of three methods. So something you know, it's a cognitive test. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines said don't do that really unless you offer other methods. And there's all kinds of reasons why that might not be an accessible approach for some people. It may be that for example, with younger people, like children, for example, they may have difficulty remembering. Other people may be cognitively impaired and may not be able to remember. Other people may not be able to see and type. You know, it's not an accessible form of authentication, and it's really hard to get right. And it's hard to get right for us. It's hard for us to get right in terms of creating good passwords. You know, coming up with unique passwords, not reusing them, making them memorable for us, but difficult for a person to remember and come up with, but at the same time not being easy for a computer to break. So I want to show you this graphic. I mentioned it earlier. Oh, speaking to the podium mic. Gotcha. Thanks. How's this? Sounds all right. So yeah, so passwords, right? Now I mentioned earlier when I was talking about it doesn't matter if your passwords are salted, hashed, encrypted because of this, right? So if you've got a password that is effectively 8 characters or shorter, it's compromised. Forget it, right? So we want things like complexity, mixtures of forget numbers, right? Just don't use numbers only. No one does that anymore anyway, apart from banks. Our most important thing that we protect. But never mind. But use combinations of upper and lowercase, symbols, all that sort of stuff. We want to do all that. But the real differentiator here is how long your password is. So you really want, at least kind of 12 characters, ideally longer. And the reason is it's very quick for a computer to crack them. And I was going to say I have worked in a place before where we did an experiment where we took an offline copy of our own user database and we ran it through some very, very cheap cloud resources. Ran it basically $20. That was our budget, right? We spent $20 to see how many passwords we could crack. We didn't actually we didn't compromise anyone's password. We didn't take any passwords out there, but we just did an experiment to see how many we could theoretically. For passwords that were 8 characters or less, we got 100% of them. 100% of passwords that were 8 characters or fewer, and it got progressively. The percentage dropped, progressively more, and then I think when we got to 16 characters that we got 0. But that was on a $20 budget, right? So if your password is in a breach, your password is compromised. Doesn't matter if it's encrypted in that database, hashed, salted, whatever. There's a question here in the audience. So the question from a member of the audience here is, why is 5 billion years yellow? Is it less than an optimal password strength? Well, I guess it depends who you ask and how patient you are. I mean, look, it's really to differentiate the kind of scale between, really the top tier there of like the trillions of years and the hundreds of billions of years. Yeah, I mean, I guess the difference between 5 billion years and the ones that are in green. In fact, looking at these numbers, I can tell you for a fact, right? The difference between the yellow and the green here is that the green is older than the lifetime of the universe. So, like I said, it depends how patient you are. So passwords, they're not great, are they? Like passwords, they're just not cool. Now, what is the problem? What is the problem with passwords? What is their major weakness? This, right? This is not a good security tool. This is the human brain. It's wonderful, awesome thing. You do all kinds of creative things. It can come up with wonderful, awesome, art and literature and software and all kinds of things like that. But it's not a good security tool, and it's not fit for purpose. It's this is not what we want to use for security and authentication. So what we really need to do is chuck it in the bin and do something better. So to summarize, passwords, they suck, right? What you should do is use a passphrase instead. Does anyone here understand this concept of a passphrase? Yeah, there's 1, 2, 3 in the audience here. So has anyone seen the Correct Battery Staple Horse XKCD cartoon? A couple of nods. Yeah, not really. So the idea is with a passphrase is that a word, any word in the dictionary is weak. It's weak to use as a password. Doesn't matter if you think you're clever and you change your A for an @ symbol. Doesn't matter if you think you're clever and you put an exclamation mark, or you even every third character put an asterisk, right? Computers can figure all that out really, really easily. So these are things called transforms and substitutions, and they're well known and they're easy for computer algorithms to crack. Now the best thing to do is use 3 or 4 short words instead, you want it to be something that ideally is not a real sentence, not something that would ever be known to anyone else, but is easy for you to remember. Now, I'm not going to talk about that too much because if you're interested, you can look that up, and there's all kinds of cool techniques you can do for coming up with that stuff. You really want to use MFA. You don't want your password to be the only thing. So do you remember I said your password or your passphrase is something you know? You want another factor as well, which can be something you have or something you are. So you really want to combine those factors, because then if your password or phrase gets compromised, it's not enough. And the other thing that I haven't listed here, but you really want to do is use a password manager. Maybe LastPass, you might want to think about something else, but you use a password manager. And the reason you want to do that is because you don't have to come up with those unique passwords. Then you can let that do it. You don't have to remember them. You just have to remember how to get into your password manager. Let that do all the rest. And then it can make them unique. It can make them ridiculously crazy so a computer can't possibly crack them, theoretically. Of course, they can in principle. All right. So we don't like passwords. We don't want passwords. We want to go passwordless, right? So I'm going to show you some passwordless scenarios that you can use. And this isn't going to be using any kind of magic. This is going to be using the technology that we have now, that we use now. And I'm going to show you that it's easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So to introduce the passwordless solutions that we're going to look at tonight, I want to introduce you to my little side project that's going to show us how all these different passwordless scenarios work. I'm going to create my own streaming service to compete with, the big boys. It's all going to be, developer content, and I'm going to call it. So what does .Netflix look like? Let's have a look. Right? Let's have a quick sign up, and then we'll come back and see what the architecture of Netflix looks a bit like. So this is my homepage. As you can see, I've it's just the default Blazor template. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Blazor, but it's a single page application framework from Microsoft. And this is just a template. So this web UI is really just really for testing and for signing up. The real crux of this app is going to be something else that I'm going to show you soon. So the first thing that I need to do is sign up. Well, I can see here that there's a login button. So I'm going to click login, and it's taking me to the sign up page, to the sign in page. We can see down here it says not a .NET Flickr yet, sign up now. So I'm going to sign up. The first thing I need to do is create a username and a password, confirm the password. Now, the first thing that I'm doing is using a password. Now, as I said, we can't get rid of passwords completely, and I'll explain why a bit later on. We could, in theory, but it's not practical, and I'll explain why. So the very first thing that I need to do is use a password here to sign in. Now, this is the ideal place to do that, and I'll explain why that is as well. But for now, let's just go ahead and do it. I'll just show you one of the problems, right? One of the things that are easy to get wrong, right? They don't match. I can't see what they are. Either they don't match. Really easy thing to get wrong. But let's just go ahead and register for now. So I've registered, and I'm back to here. I'm just going to refresh that because I've got a bug in my Blazor app. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just going to click on this videos link here. This is going to get a bunch of videos, playlists, and I can click on one of these playlists, and I can see some videos. Cool, that's it. That's enough for now. Let's go and have a look at the rest of. In fact, why don't I show you the really cool bit, right? So this is just some demo stuff, right? This is just some tests. I want to make sure that everything's running. The fact that I can see this now tells me that my whole architecture is running and that one of my passwordless scenarios is working. And I'll show you what that is shortly. But this isn't really my app, right? I don't want to use a web app. What I want to do is have an app that you can install on your TV, right? Because that's where it's really at, right? I want this to run on your smart TV or your games console or your tablet or whatever. So I've created this app. I've created this this .Netflix app, and here it is. Now, this was created in .NET MAUI, so I'm running it here on Windows, but this will run on my Android smart TV. It will run on my iPad. It will run on my Android tablet, Mac OS, whatever. I'm just using it here, Windows, for the demo. Now, let's say this is running on my TV. I don't really want to enter my username and password. I want a passwordless scenario, and here's our first one. Who here has seen something like this before? Yeah? Yeah. This is cool. This is quite familiar, right? So what this is saying is, don't sign up here. Don't log in here because that's too hard. Go somewhere else and log in and enter this code to confirm. Now, I've got a QR code there as well. That has got that URL and the code as a query parameter. So I could scan that on my phone and go and log in on my phone. And I don't even have to type that code in. We've all done that before. We've all seen that. It's familiar. That's really cool. And I'm going to show you how it works shortly. But for now, let's go and log in. So it's telling me to go to here. localhost 2001/device. And it's asking me to enter that code. Code is UQWUH. And now it's saying, do you want to authorize this request? Yes, allow. Now I can go back to here, and any second now, boom, there we go. So I'm logged in. Now I know that my passwordless scenario just worked to get me into the app, but I also know that there's more passwordless scenarios going on in the background. And I'll tell you why, right? So I could go into here, for example, this tech chat playlist, and I can see that there's a bunch of videos in here. This one is premium. It's marked by this little crown down here in the corner as a premium video. And I can see it's locked because I'm not a premium subscriber. Now, all of this is coming from a bunch of different places that are all talking to each other, and they need to be authenticated, and there's no user there, so there's no password there. Let's have a look at what this is and see if we can figure out how it works. So we've seen the .Netflix app and solution. Let me explain to you the architecture of how this is built. So the videos are stored on YouTube, and I have a videos API that gets the videos and the playlists and the metadata from YouTube. Now I have an API key, and that's how that API talks to YouTube. That's obviously not a password scenario. I'm not going to talk about API keys because even though they're used a lot and lots of places do them and it's a well-known approach, it's not a standard, and everyone implements it in their own way. So I'm not really going to talk about that. But I also have a gateway API. Now my Blazor web app and my .NET MAUI app talk to this gateway API and just to the gateway API in terms of the .Netflix content. The gateway API talks to the videos API. And it also talks to a subscriptions API. And the subscriptions API lets it know whether the person that's subscribing is a premium subscriber or not. Then there's the TV app. TV app talks to the gateway API. There's an identity provider. Now, I'm using Identity Server here for this, and there's a few reasons why I'm using Identity Server. One of them is that, as it happens, we at SSW here are actually the APAC support partner for Identity Server. So if you want to talk to Identity Server, come and talk to us. But also, it's very, very flexible, and I've done some stuff to extend the functionality of it here, which you can't really do with things like your cloud-based identity providers. You can. There's some customization you can do, but it's nowhere near as flexible as something like Identity Server. Everything needs to talk to the identity provider, so they all need to get tokens to talk to each other. So JSON Web Tokens, and they need to validate those tokens as well. Then there's a browser app for use on desktops and laptops, and we saw that. And there might be mobile phones. Now, the mobile phone could use the app or it could use the browser. So in a nutshell, .Netflix, it uses OIDC, and that's because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I'm not going to invent my own authentication mechanisms. I'm not creating anything magical here. I'm just using the tools that we already know. Who here is using OIDC in their applications? Nearly everyone. And the components we use a JWT to authenticate. JWT is a JSON Web Token. Do you guys know what a JWT is? What JSON Web Token is? Nearly everyone, yeah. So it basically it's just a JSON. It's a JSON object with 3 components: a header, which contains some metadata; the payload, which contains what's called claims. That's information about the information contained in the token, and a signature. And the signature is effectively an anti-tamper mechanism. So let's talk about how these things are going to talk to each other. So the first thing in our .Netflix architecture, I'll just go back. So just a reminder, here's the architecture. The first thing that we need to do is figure out how the APIs talk to each other. So API communication, API to API communication. Let's look at some of the features of this authentication scenario. There's no keyboard, so forget usernames and passwords. There's no mouse, not really helpful. There's no USB port. Even if there was, USB is not a great way of mass authentication in this regard. It's suitable for some scenarios that we'll look at later, but it's not viable for my my cloud situation. What we're going to do, take a USB to Azure and get them to plug it in. Biometric. There's no biometric sensor. There's no user. There's no one to have a sensor for anyway. There's no remote control. Who here saw the little trailer for this talk? Anyone? Yeah. So you can see how I feel about using a remote control to enter passwords. If you haven't seen that, you should. There's no user, right? So even if we had all these things, there's no user to authenticate anyway. So there's no, it doesn't make any sense. But what it is secure, and that's unique to this scenario compared to the other authentication scenarios, and that lets us do something that we can't do anywhere else. And what that is that this is what's called, in OIDC terms, it's a confidential client. So in OIDC, you've got a bunch of different resources. You've got identity resources, API resources, clients, and clients fall into two categories: public clients and confidential clients. Confidential clients are secure, and that means you can put a secret in it. You can't put a secret in a public client because a public client is not secure. So something like the web app that we saw, something like the .NET MAUI app that we saw, those are public. And that means that they're available to everyone. People can poke around in them and look at the code. And that's why we can't put secrets in them. But we can in our APIs because they're in our controlled environment. They're in our data center or they're in our cloud. So we have control of those. So we can put secrets in there. So these APIs are secure. They're confidential. These clients are not secure. They're not confidential. So we can't put secrets in those. What about the TV? Let's have a look at this. Again, no keyboard, no mouse, USB, maybe, but we can't guarantee that. And again, not really what we want to do in this scenario. I don't want someone to have to plug a USB stick into their TV anytime they want to watch Netflix. They'll cancel their subscription and I'll make no money. That's no good. Biometrics, no, not on a TV. Do have a remote control. Again, putting in a password on a TV with a remote control is not fun. It's terrible. We do have a user, so that's different. But again, it's not secure. No secrets in there. Now, what about on a laptop or a desktop? We do have a keyboard. We do have a mouse. We do have a USB. I put a question mark on this. We probably do have biometrics, but let's not assume that it's guaranteed. Remote control, no. We do have a user, and it's not secure. Phone, we have a keyboard, but it's rubbish. It's no good. I saw a video probably about 2 or 3 weeks now of Steve Ballmer back in 2007, and he was talking about the iPhone. And he was saying, "Oh, it doesn't have a physical keyboard. It's just not a good email machine. And so, people sharing this video were laughing, saying, "Oh, we sure showed him. He was wrong." The thing is, he wasn't wrong. He was right. A touchscreen keyboard on a phone is a terrible experience for typing. We all accept it now, and we're all so used to it. But it's not good. It's not a good email machine. He was right about that. He was wrong that would mean it wouldn't be successful. He was very wrong about that. But he was absolutely right that it's not a good email machine. Mouse, not on a phone, no. USB, no. Now, biometrics. Now, I'm going to say yes, because I think if the phone is more than a certain number of years old, it's going to have a biometric sensor of some kind. It's going to have a fingerprint reader, or it's going to have facial recognition. Anything older than that, well, they can't use the biometric feature. That's fine. But we can assume that it's something that's going to be widely available on our mobile phones for our mobile phone users. No remote control. There is a user, but it's not secure. It's not confidential. All right. So in the MVP version of .NETflix, which we've seen so far, the MVP version, we're going to have a bunch of different authentication mechanisms that are going to secure the communication between these different components. So for API to API, we're going to use something called the client credentials grant. Now, what a client credentials grant is rather than having a username and password that is used to issue a token on behalf of a user, you have a client secret. And that client secret can be used in these scenarios because these clients are secure. They're in secure environments. And that token is issued on behalf of an application, so rather than a user. So that's the client credentials grant, and that is a really good situation for there. For the TV, we're going to use something called the device code grant. Device code grant, we've already seen. That's where you show that code and you say, go somewhere else and log in. and when that is authorized, on this side, we'll get a token, and that token will be on behalf of a user. So we've already seen that. I'm going to show you a little bit shortly how that works. Username and password. Now, I did say that we need a username and password, and we do, and I'll explain why later. We do still need a username and password for now. Now, in all of these scenarios, we have to do it somewhere. This is the best place to do it, right? So on a laptop or a desktop computer, we've got a keyboard, and a good keyboard, not a rubbish keyboard like on a little touch screen. We've got an easy to use keyboard. We've got a browser. That is the best place to do it. So you have to have a username and password somewhere. That's where you do it, right? Now on the phone, we're using username and password for now as well, but it's not very good. And as I said, this is MVP. So we'll see if we can improve that a bit later on. All right, now let's see how all these things work. So we've seen what they do, we understand what they're called, and now I'm going to show you how they work. So I have a little tool here called Postman. Who here uses Postman? That is about 60% of people. So Postman is a tool basically for testing REST APIs and lots of other things now as well. You can do GraphQL, gRPC, all kinds of cool stuff. But it lets you test APIs. Now the reason I'm showing this is using this is because I'm going to show you that all of the things that we're talking about so far are basically just very simple HTTP calls. So for the device code grant, now can I zoom in? No. Hopefully everyone can see that. I have a URL here. I'm using an environment variable here called identity. And in my environment, that is defined as localhost :5001, which is where my identity server is running on. Okay. Now I'm going to go to a URL called connect/device authorization. Now I actually know where that is, but in OIDC there's something called the discovery document, which is common on all OIDC compliant identity providers, and that tells you where all these endpoints are. I'm not going to go into that now. Now, in terms of the data that we send it all as form URL encoded values, and we're going to send two values: the client ID and the scopes. Now, the client ID is defined in the configuration of your identity provider. The scopes are mostly as well, apart from some of these are standard scopes. So these are what's called standard scopes, and they're profile, OpenID, and offline access. And they're going to do different things, like give me some OIDC stuff, some profile information about the user. Offline access means that I'm going to get a refresh token. Now, a refresh token means that when the access token that I get from this as well expires or is about to expire, I can request a new one using that refresh token without another interaction from the user. Then there's this scope here called .Netflix API. Now, this is a scope that I've defined. And what that does is that tells the identity provider what resource I want access to. So that is going to define what the audience claim is on the token that we get back. All right, let's do it. Let's do it. So I click send, and okay. So I click send, and I get a response from my identity provider here. Now, can I zoom in there? Yeah, that's what I'm trying. How do I do that? Windows magnify. Windows U? No, that didn't work either. Never mind. It's okay. Hopefully you guys can see this, but effectively the payload that we get back here is a bunch of different things. The first thing is the device code. So this is called the device code grant, and this is the heart of it. Now, what happens now is I, as the client that has received this, poll the identity provider periodically with this device code and ask for a token. Effectively, when I send that, what I'm asking is, has this been authenticated yet? Okay, so if I were to do that now, and by the way, I've got some tests in here. So what's happening now is that device code is being set as another variable, which is being sent here. So this is going to the token endpoint. Again, it's just form URL encoded values. The grant type I'm specifying is device code. I'm specifying the client is the .Netflix client, and there's the device code. Now, if I send that now, error, authorization pending. I can send that authorization pending. Slow down. I did it too quickly, right? So the other thing that you get here is some metadata, right? So it tells me how long until that expires, 5 minutes, 300 seconds, what the interval is, so I can't poll more quickly than every 5 seconds. And then it tells me where to go to do. So these are the things that I display to the user. I display the user code, and I say, this is where you go to enter that user code to approve it. And as I said, there's the version here that's called complete, which contains that code as a query parameter. So I can click on that, and that's going to take me to here. Now I'm already logged in here. I'm already authenticated. So all I have to do is click yes, allow. And then when I go back to here, and now when I poll and say, give me the stuff for that device code, I get my ID token, my access token, and the metadata about what the token type is, when it expires, the refresh token, and then the scopes. Now, if I were to grab this access token, so it's a base64 encoded string, and I can put that into this tool here called DevToys. Is anyone here using DevToys? 1, 2. It's really cool. It's free. You can get it from the Windows Store. It's already detected that there's a token in my clipboard. It's showing me the header here, and then here's the payload. And we can see that the audience here is the .Netflix API, and the scope that I've added has told it to issue that. These are the scopes I've requested, and then here are the claims. So this is the payload. This is the information. The subject is my user ID in the system, the client ID, my email address, all that sort of stuff. So that's cool. So that's it. That's how the device code flow grant works. It's not magic, right? You basically send one HTTP request, you get some data, you show some of that to the user, you get some other data, and you just literally ping an endpoint with that data periodically until you get the answer that you want. Now, I've got another test here, which is putting that that access token in another variable. So I can click here and I can say get playlists, and that access token is being sent as a variable there. We can see that I've got the playlists. I can say get this playlist ID, and I can call get videos and give me the videos for this playlist. And I can put that playlist ID here, and it's giving me some stuff. Now, the fact that both of these are returning results tells me that the client credentials grant is working, because I'm not talking to the service that returns this data. I'm talking to my gateway API, which is talking to that. Okay. The client credentials grant that I mentioned, also simple, right? So again, you ping the token endpoint, the same token endpoint that you ping here, but you have to specify the grant type, right? Because all of these requests for tokens go to the same token endpoint. So here I've said use the device code grant. Here I'm saying use the client credentials grant. This time I'm asking for a token for the subscriptions API. It's got a different client ID and it's got a client secret. Now, don't worry, this is not a real secret for a real thing out on the internet. Knock yourself out, try and crack it if you want. It does nothing. But I can click send, and I can see that I get an access token. Now, again, I've got a test here that's setting this to another variable, so I can open up this one here, and I can say, give me the subscription using, this is now using this token that was obtained with the client credentials grant. In fact, if I just stick this in DevToys, let me just get rid of that. We see that we've got some different stuff here, right? So there's some things missing. There's no subject ID because a subject is a user. This doesn't correspond to a user. There's no metadata like email address and all that sort of stuff because this is for machine-to-machine communication. Now again, I can call that subscriptions endpoint with this token here because of that claim, that audience. The audience here is the subscriptions API, so I can use that and I can say. The subscriber name is, what did I put? Matt at NetUG. And we can see that there's the subscriber name, is premium, false. So we can see that I'm not a subscriber. Let's see if we've got another user here that is. There we go. So Matt Goldman at NetUG is a premium subscriber. So if I were logged in with that, I would actually have access to all those cool, that premium content, those locked out videos. Now, if you're clever, you might have noticed a pattern here. The videos that are premium are, of course, the videos that feature me. So anything that has Goldman in the subject or the title or description, and any user that has Goldman in the name is premium. Like I don't have an actual list of premium subscribers. That's it. So that's what we've looked at so far. Those are everything apart from the initial login with username and password. That is done with a traditional cookie. So when you use an identity provider and you go to a website and you say log in, you get redirected to the identity provider. You log into that identity provider, you then get a cookie. You then get directed back to your what's called the relying party application with what's called an authorization code. And that relying party application calls the token endpoint with the authorization grant type. And because it's coming from your browser, it's got that cookie that's authenticated, you get an access token back. But other than that, everything that we've seen here is just these simple HTTP requests. So that was that demo, and I really just want to drive this point home, but it's all just HTTP requests. Always has been. There's no magic there at all. It's all just HTTP traffic. This is all stuff that we know, right? Now, I don't want to oversimplify this. You know, like I said, there's no magic here. It's all easy to understand stuff. Now, this is for this authentication traffic. Now, authentication inside a identity provider, how it works, inside your application, that is magic. I don't want to claim that that's simple, and of course it's not magic, but it's much more complex than what I've shown you. But each identity provider is implemented differently. They comply to some standards, and using those standards is as simple as making a few HTTP requests. That's it. All right, that's the MVP of .Netflix. Let's look at what we're going to do for non-MVP. How can we improve this, right? Because we've still got this problem down here at the bottom with usernames and passwords, and I want to use something called WebAuthn instead. WebAuthn is short for the Web Authentication API, and this is going to let us do passwordless authentication. And again, this is all an open standard. Now, the internals of WebAuthn, how they're implemented at certain parts, not necessarily that simple, but unless we'll come back to that. But in terms of how you use it, how we use it in our code and our applications, really, really straightforward. And I'm going to show you, right? So that's cool. But what else can we do with this? Well, we can do it here as well. We can do it on our laptop. So we still need the username and password to sign up initially. Again, I will explain why. We do need that. But once that's done, you don't have to keep using it, right? You do it once, you set and forget, and then you use your passwordless authentication using WebAuthn. What is WebAuthn? Well, sorry, has anyone here heard of WebAuthn before? We've got 0 here in Sydney in the audience. Oh no, 1. Okay, so the question here from the audience was, is it the same that's what's on Azure B2C? And did you say about chaining identity providers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was about using, say, Google or another identity provider to log in, so you don't need to have a password for that identity provider or that service. You use something else. That's not WebAuthn. That's just standard OIDC. So that's part of that spec. So what I said earlier about if I'm at Azure AD B2C or Identity Server, I edit there or wherever else, I click login with Google. I get redirected to Google. I log in, I get a cookie, I get redirected back with an authorization code, and then the same thing happens there. Once I'm logged in with that identity provider, I then get redirected back to the original relying party. So that's just chaining the OIDC. It's all working the same way. So I'll explain what WebAuthn is. It's part of something called FIDO2. So I guess the next question here is, has anyone heard of FIDO2? I'll explain what FIDO2 is. So because that was, we had no hands up here in Sydney. So FIDO2 is a standard that has been built by a consortium of companies, including Microsoft and a few other very big tech people, who have recognized that passwords are not fit for purpose, and they've tried to come up with what are we going to do next, and this is it, right? So FIDO2 is an open standard, and it's what we do now instead of passwords. We still need the passwords, but this is what we use most of the time, and this is backed by a massive group of organizations. So WebAuthn is part of FIDO2. There are 2 key parts. The other part is called the CTAP, and that's the Client to Authenticator Protocol. Now, what that means is that you need, to do WebAuthn, you need something called an authenticator. Now, this doesn't mean like your Microsoft Authenticator app or your Google Authenticator app. In WebAuthn and FIDO, an authenticator is something specific. And we're going to look at what that is shortly, but effectively it means that you authenticate against the authenticator, and then the authenticator is what authenticates against your identity provider. The client to authenticator protocol is the bit that is built into your operating system and your browser that says someone wants to do a web authentication and launch an authenticator. It checks to see what authenticators are available, and then it launches one or gives you the option to choose one, and then we kick off our various different things. I'm going to show you what that is shortly. So it uses authenticators, as I described. There are two kinds of authenticators. Platform authenticators. These are typically things like biometrics, like a fingerprint reader or a face scanner. Platform authenticators because they are built into the platform. And roaming authenticators. And these are typically something like a USB, like a YubiKey. So quick question, who here is using a YubiKey? No one here in Sydney. Okay. So YubiKey is it's basically a USB device that you can buy. You can get many of them, and you can set up this web authn passwordless authentication with it. But then instead of being tied to the fingerprint sensor on your computer or the face scanner on your phone, you just use this USB key, and you can use it on any machine. And of course, you can then go back to your internet cafe, and you don't have to worry about typing a password, and you don't have to worry about a keylog or any of that, because the authenticator is you take it with you when you go. Hopefully you don't forget it and leave it in there. But even if you did, someone else can't use it. And again, I'll explain why. So the Web Authentication API is made up of two what's called ceremonies. And these ceremonies are registration and authentication. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, registration in this case is not signing up for a user account, although it can be. In the example I'm going to show you, it's not going to be, and there's a reason why. It's signing up for a web authentication session. And authentication is, of course, authentication. Sorry, when I said session, it's a credential. It's signing up for a web, or it's registering a web authn credential. And we'll look at what that is shortly. So how do these ceremonies work? Well, the registration ceremony works like this. The browser, using a JavaScript API, sends a registration request to the identity provider. The identity provider sends back what's called a challenge. Now, challenge is a cryptographic block which exists to uniquely identify this interaction and, of course, prevent tampering and man-in-the-middle attacks and that kind of stuff. The browser then launches an authenticator. It looks for an authenticator and says, okay, you pick one if you've got more than one. If you've only got one, it will let you choose that one. So this would be something like your roaming authenticator, like your YubiKey, or potentially your biometric sensor on your phone or laptop or whatever. Now, the authenticator can then ask the user to authenticate. So this is authenticating against the authenticator itself, okay? So not against the API, not against the identity provider, but just against the authenticator. So if you're using a YubiKey, they've got a little fingerprint sensor on them. If you're using your phone, when you do your Face ID or your thumbprint, you're not authenticating against your identity provider, you're literally authenticating against the phone. Same with on your Windows laptop. There's a chip in here called the TPM chip, which is a hardware security chip. So when I'm doing Windows Hello, which can be fingerprint sensor or a PIN or whatever, that's authenticating locally against that authenticator. So you do the registration request, you get the challenge, you launch an authenticator, the authenticator says, cool, we got a challenge here, prove to me that you are who you say you are. Now, you don't have to do that every time. In fact, your response, your metadata that comes along with the challenge can actually specify whether that should be done all the time or not. But your user then authenticates to your authenticator. The authenticator then creates a key pair, so a public key and a private key. The private key is stored securely in the authenticator, and this is really important, right? So on your YubiKey, it's stored on the YubiKey, right? Not on the operating system, not on the file system. On Windows, it's stored in the TPM chip itself, okay? And on macOS and Android, there's various other security chips. And that's where, when you're using FIDO 2 compliant authenticator, The private key is stored in the authenticator. The challenge is then signed with the public key, and that signed challenge and the public key is sent back to the authenticator. Now, in the registration ceremony, a signed challenge is called an attestation. The public key is then saved to the database. That is now ready to be used. That's now what's called a registered credential, and that's now ready to be used for authentication. Now, to explain the different components of this and how they fit into FIDO2, this stuff here at the top, these parts at the top here are part of the WebAuthn, the Web Authentication API. And this stuff that happens down here is part of the CTAP, the Client to Authenticator Protocol. That's the registration ceremony. The authentication ceremony, very, very similar. So the browser issues an authentication request to the identity provider. The identity provider sends back a challenge, again, a cryptographic block. The browser launches an authenticator. And if you've got more than one, it will ask you, right? So it will say, choose an authenticator. And it's up to you to choose the right one that's associated with that identity provider that's got the right credential, right? So the authenticator, again, may or may not ask you to authenticate. This time, it's going to sign the challenge with the private key, okay? And it's going to send that signed challenge back to the identity provider. Now, in the authentication ceremony, a signed challenge is called an assertion. So for registering, it's called an attestation. For authenticating, it's called an assertion, okay? Again, do you remember earlier I was saying about authentication being about proof of ownership, right? So it's something you are, something you know, or something you have. Now in WebAuthn and FIDO, the something that you have that you're proving ownership of is that private key. So when you signed up originally, when you registered with your attestation, you said, okay, I'm registering. Here's the public key that anytime I want to authenticate, I'm going to prove that I have the private key that corresponds to this public key. So then, anytime you get issued a challenge, you sign it with that private key and you send it back. And that way the identity provider is able to verify that you have the private key that corresponds to that public key. So at this point, you've sent back your assertion, which is your signed challenge. The identity provider uses the public key that it's got stored to verify that and sends back an authentication result. Pretty simple, right? Let's see it in action, shall we? Let's have a look. All right. So I'm going to go back here. We don't need this anymore. The first thing that I'm going to do is register. So I'm going to go to passwordless/register. I think this is the right URL. There we go. So the first thing it's saying is register for passwordless auth. So I click register, and it's asking me now to choose a security key. Now I only have one here and here at the moment. So Windows Hello. Again, I'm using Windows 11. I've got a TPM chip in this laptop. It's built in. I could plug in a YubiKey. I could use something else. It's all just FIDO2 compliant stuff. But I'm going to click Windows Hello. And my slow laptop is going to be slow. So it's Windows Hello, right? So I've got some options here. So I can use a PIN or I can use a fingerprint. I'm going to try my fingerprint. My fingerprint scanner on my laptop is terrible, but let's. There we go. It worked. Okay. So again, all of it slow laptop. But there you go. You can see registered successfully. So that's it. I've now registered a private key that's stored in the TPM chip on my laptop, sent the public key back to my identity provider, and I'm now registered for passwordless auth. Let's go ahead and use it. So I'm going to go back to my .Netflix web app. I'm in an in-private window now, so I don't have a cookie here, so I'm not logged in. I'm going to click login. Now, a little Easter egg here in my .Netflix demo, magic key combination, Control-Alt-P brings up my passwordless login button, right? So I click passwordless login, and there we go. It's launched the WebAuthn ceremony. It's now coming up saying, do you want to log in with this? I'm going to choose this one, say OK. That's now authenticating against identity provider. Make sure it's you, scan my fingerprint, and it worked. Thank goodness. Logged in. Any second now, redirected back to here, and you can see I'm logged in. How easy was that? Didn't have to use my password at all. Pretty magical, right? Who's keen to use this in their products now? A few people? Everyone? Yeah, cool. All right. That was WebAuthn. Let's ditch passwords. So who wants to see how that works? Who wants to see the code? Yeah? Let's have a quick look. I'm going to show you that this is, I already showed you using Postman that it's just HTTP requests. So the first thing that I've got defined here in Identity Server is my client definitions. By the way, all of this is on GitHub, right? So where is it? I'll give you this URL afterwards, but I've got this repo here. It's on GitHub. It's open. I've got here, hopefully this video will be here as well eventually, but a little README that tells you how to run this yourself if you want to run it. I've also got a wiki that I'm going to show you this code in a minute, but there's a wiki here, work in progress, but almost done, that explains how all of these things work as well. So you can, you can check this out at any time, and this will be available, so you can see all this. But I've got my client definitions. These are for my OIDC clients in my identity server. So I've got some API scopes, some API resources, the videos API, subscriptions API, and the gateway API. And then I've got the clients, right? So this one I'm not using. This is the client, the interactive client. So this is the one that's used for. Sorry, this is the web UI client. This is the one that's using the authorization code grant. So this is the one that lets me log in with the username and password into my web UI. This is the MAUI UI client, and this is using device code flow. So this is the one that does the little code, and I log in somewhere else. And then I've got the videos client and the subscriptions client, and these are using the client credentials grant with their little client secrets defined. In my API, in my gateway API, I've got a token handler. Now this is a delegating handler. What that means is that I've wired this up to intercept any HTTP requests and attach a bearer token to it, basically. But in this case, because this is in an API and because I don't need to worry about user interactions to obtain that token, this token handler is also responsible for obtaining that token. Now, it's got an HTTP client that's injected into it. And that is assigned here through the HTTP client factory, and this is the identity client. This is not the same client, that this handler is attached to, but this is one that has no authentication that's used for getting those tokens. So this is the method where I'm overriding send async and attaching that bearer token to it. But the one I want to show you here is this get API token method. Again, this is just using these form URL encoded values. So I start by creating a dictionary and adding those key pairs to it, which is these come from config. These are in my app settings.json. But I've got the client ID, the scope, the secret, and the grant type. I basically form URL encode that dictionary of values and just send it to that token endpoint. Get a token back. I get the access token out of that response, and I get the expiry out of that response. Save them in some fields here, and then that way any future requests can just check whether there's one there and that it's not expired and use that. And if it's expired, just get a new one. Really simple. Now there are client libraries that do this. So for the guys that make Identity Server have got one called identity model.oidc client. If you're using Okta or Azure AD, Microsoft Entra, or you're using Auth0 or whatever, all these things have their own client packages and SDKs that you can use. And I could have used one here, but I didn't because I just want to show you how easy it is. Like, when you use a client like that, and you should, if the vendor provides a client, you should just use it because it makes things easier. But you don't have to because it's not a black box. It's not magic. It's just HTTP calls, and that's why I've done it this way. In the MAUI app, I've got this auth handler, which again does the same thing, just injects that token. Now, how I get that token is a bit different here because it does require a user. But again, same thing, right? So the first thing I'm doing is generating a token request, and I'm asking for, generate a code request. And again, form URL encoded values. I've got the client ID and the scope, and I form URL encode those and send them. Sorry, that's returned back up here, but I form URL encode those and send them. And then when I this is actually called from somewhere else in the UI. But when I get that device code, I poll periodically with that device code, and wait till I've got a response. And then when I've got a response, I can request the token, and the token is basically the same thing. So key pairs, key value pairs, client ID, grant type, and device code, polling with that periodically until I get that token back. Again, your client libraries and SDKs will do this, but I'm just showing you here how easy it is. It's not magic at all. All right, let's talk a little bit now about the WebAuthn stuff, and I'm going to show you this code quickly as well. In my identity server, and remember I said that there's a reason I used identity server and that it's extensible. Now, some of these other IDPs offer this stuff out of the box, but they don't give you as much freedom to customize it as you have here. So I've created a controller. I'm using a library here called FIDO2.net. What that does, that's responsible for things like creating the challenges, right? And then validating those challenges. So what that's doing is creating those cryptographic blocks. It's responsible for creating the responses to the attestation and for the assertion. So I've just got an API endpoint here that's called make credential options. And the UI, the little web page where you do passwordless auth, register for it, sends a request to here and says, give me some stuff back. You can look through this. It's not the most interesting part. I'm going to show you that later. And then the authentication controller, the same thing. I've got an assertion options endpoint where I get the assertion. I say, oh, someone wants to log in without a password. Give me the options. It kind of sends back a response. That's the challenge. And then I make the assertion where I basically send the signed challenge back, the assertion back. Now, at the interesting bit. So inside my identity server login page, I've got, inside my identity server register page, I've got some JavaScript code that runs. And you can look through this and you can look through what all this is doing. But the first thing that it's doing, as I said, is getting those attestation options. And then it's creating an attestation. Now that is done here. This is really the most important part. And this is the only bit that really matters, right? There's a JavaScript API called navigator.credentials.create. And that's all you need to know, right? You don't need to know about CTAP. You don't need to know how it launches your authenticator, how it creates the private key. You don't need to know any of that, right? You just need to know how this works, how this JavaScript API works. Your browser and your operating system are responsible for the rest. And same thing when it comes to authentication. Again, I've got some JavaScript stuff here. This is my magic key combination that unhides the passwordless login box. I've got to get some assertion options from the API. So I say, hey, someone wants to log in, give me those assertion options. Do some other stuff. But again, the most important bit, the bit that matters, is this one. Navigator.credentials.get. And that's all you need to do. And you just put that in your JavaScript. Yeah, you got to do some other stuff around here as well. But again, it's just JavaScript. You can see how it works. You don't need to know how to sign the assertion. You don't need to know how to do any of that. All you need to know is you call this JavaScript API. The client to authenticator protocol takes care of the rest, signs the assertion. You send it back to the assertion endpoint, which is done in this method here, where it's basically just an HTTP call at that point. I'm just posting that assertion back to the API, and I get a response. That's it. It's like there's no magic in there at all. Now, I keep saying that this stuff is simple, but again, just like an identity provider, right? Building an identity provider is hard, but interacting with one is easy. Building a FIDO2 authenticator is hard. I don't want to say that that's easy, but interacting with one is. Like, you just use these very simple standard JavaScript APIs. And that's all there is to it. So in conclusion about passwords, well, they suck. Passwords, they just suck. They're just terrible. Passwordless auth is cool, right? We've seen lots of different ways of doing passwordless auth. And all of those are using technology that we know now, that we have now. Like, there's no, like, I didn't show you, this is some emerging, breaking tech. This is the stuff that we already use all the time already. But sadly, we still need passwords for now. Why is that? Well, the reason we still need passwords is because, hypothetically, let's say I didn't have passwords in .Netflix. Let's say I go to the web browser and I can sign up just using the attestation WebAuthn ceremony. I don't use a password. I sign up with my Windows Hello. Then I go to log in somewhere else and I can't, because my user ID literally just exists in the TPM chip on my phone, on my computer. I did the same thing on my phone. I could never log in with that account anywhere else. Same thing on my, with my YubiKey. Yeah, that YubiKey is my is now my identity. Now there are ways around this. They're not great, but so for example, you could do something like a redemption workflow where you say, I want to register another device. So you send an email and you click a link, and you can do things like that. But they're inelegant and they're cumbersome. The best thing to do for now is to use a password to sign up, unfortunately. But once you've done that, ideally you never use it again. Now, potentially there are some things emerging that can get around this as well. Better things like biohacking. Who here has heard of biohacking? We got one here in Sydney. I'll show you an example. So this is a screenshot of a Daily Mail article. So it's probably garbage. Ignore it. But this is a story about a guy who's a biohacker, and what he's done is he's put these little chips. They're about the size of a grain of rice. There's lots of people doing this all over the world. And I'm pretty sure they're RFID is the technology that they're using. You put it under your skin, and then you can use that for all kinds of things. Now, at this point, it doesn't matter, whether it's your phone or your computer or whatever. You've always got it on you. It's under your skin, unless you lose your hand, unfortunately, something like that. Biohacking, and there's some cool stuff you can do with this, right? Like, I'll show you this little clip, right? So this is really cool. So I mentioned I like motorcycles, right? So this is combining passwordless with motorcycles. This guy's using NFC, not RFID, but watch this. This is really cool. I don't have sound.
Normally, when you want to start the bike,
I'll explain
you put the key inside, turn it right, with the second for the electronic,
what you do normally,
and start the bike. But I don't need this anymore, because I can do the same just with my hand by putting it here, wait for the electronics again, and start the bike without the key.
Built this little hack on his bike.
If I want to kill the engine, I do the same.
And he just puts
Simple as that.
That's pretty cool, I think. I'm not quite ready to do that yet.
Review myself.
Because chips under the skin, bit of a contentious issue at the moment. So we know what this lot think about that. They don't think it's a great idea putting chips under the skin. We had a lot of controversy around this, around COVID vaccines and 5G. So chips under the skin, probably not the right way to go at the moment. Now, the thing is, if you think about the person that's highest profile investing in this kind of stuff at the moment, it's this guy. So who here has heard of his Neuralink project? Everyone here, nearly everyone here, heard of Neuralink. So Neuralink is basically going to be wires that he puts into your brain, and it's a human-computer interface via literal wires in the brain. So maybe they're right to worry about this for now. But I don't know. Maybe if he gets out of hand, Mark Zuckerberg can come along and beat him up. So that is it about passwords and about passwordless, and unfortunately we do still need them for now, but as I said, lots of things we can do to not have to use them. Now, if you've got any feedback about all the things I showed you today, there's a QR code that you can scan here, not with the rewards app. You just scan it on your phone, and this takes you to a form. Now, if you complete that form, you will get 500 points in the rewards app, which you can use for getting some cool prizes. So I'll leave that one up there for a minute, and just there's a couple of people here scanning that. So I really appreciate any feedback you have for me. It looks like we're almost ready to move on. I'll leave it up for another minute. Yeah, so as I said, 500 points. You can use those points for like Mi Band, which Adam is modeling for us very beautifully there. Some other cool stuff as well, like we've got some really good keep cups and all kinds of other cool swag, and there's really good draws you can go into. All right, so as I said, you can find this presentation on GitHub. I didn't say that actually, but you can. I said you can find the repo on GitHub, and I'll make sure that link's available for everyone as well. And thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
20 seconds. Thank you. That was it was really good. I don't know about, but historically, auth has just been one of those things I'm kind of terrified to touch. I don't understand it a great deal, and it's like, look, everything that you build needs auth, but you kind of just look for the simplest solution. You're like, oh, I'll use Azure AD or Auth0 or something along those lines. Just make it somebody else's problem, and if there's a break, well, if there's a leak, it's not my fault, right? And the whole of Microsoft is hacked or something like that. But yeah, showing us how you can build all of this sort of rich features and functionality into an identity server now, and I guess steer us on the course towards going passwordless is really good. And the fact that you're able to show that you can get all of these new fancy FIDO enabled sort of auth things with a single line of JavaScript probably makes a lot of people like me go, all right, I could probably do this, right? I could add this in and get all of this cool functionality. So we did have some questions throughout the talk. I'm just going to run through some of those now. Some of them are mine, some of them are from the chat. The first question I want to ask is, you showed the matrix, if you will, of password strength and complexity versus sort of, the time it would take to just brute force it.
Yeah.
What's the trajectory looking like for that? Are we talking sort of, if you've got a password that's going to be cracked in 2 years now, in 12 months time, does that go down to 6 months? Is it, do we see the end of passwords being secure coming up, or what?
That's a really good question. And there's a couple of interesting things to look at in response to that. So the first thing is that graphic that I showed you is from a company called Hive Systems, and they publish this every year. So what we could do is we could go back over the past, say, 5 years and plot that on a chart and
measure it,
literally see where that trajectory is going.
Set up like a doomsday clock for when
That's right,
all passwords go down.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is that, of course, one thing that's on the potentially distant horizon, but not too distant, is quantum computing.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but you have. All right.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. Let's not go into it too much, but that is going to change things a lot. And that is, that will effectively, all of those numbers will go right down.
Yes.
Yeah.
They will. All right. So if you're sitting around the sort of 5 billion year mark right now, you're probably safe for another 12 months at least, right?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. Just checking. Right. Just checking.
I can't guarantee that.
Now, one of the things that you sort of raised very early on is you chose to go with Duende Identity Server for this demo, right? Yes, we're the APAC partner for that, and it does a bunch of wonderful things. I mean, you and I have fought with other sort of, identity providers, sort of bending them to our will, trying to get them to do things that just generally they're kind of not really meant to do out of the box, at least not with a lot of effort. What part of all of this do you sort of draw the line in the sand and go, okay, yeah, look, I can do A, B, and C quite easily with existing auth providers out there. But if I really want to have D in my software, right, that's when I kind of go, all right, now I'm going to need to build my own identity server to achieve this.
Where do I draw the line? Well, the line doesn't necessarily have to be drawn at what you can and can't do. I tend to also draw the line on how easy it is.
Yeah.
Now, some of these things cost money, some of them don't. Some of them have free tiers, some of them don't. Identity server compared to some of the other options, not necessarily that expensive. Requires a little bit more effort, but if you want to do something that's very standard and you just you don't want to do anything, any of the cloud identity providers, identity as a service will let you do it. But really, as soon as you want to do anything out of the ordinary, it's much easier to just use identity server.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but it's all just .NET code sitting there in C#. As you said, we have actually fought with some very good identity providers that do a lot of stuff, but as soon as you want to do something different, you can't. So, for example, I'll give you one example. When I did the device code flow, we saw two things that would be quite hard to do somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I customized that UI. Some of the identity providers,
which sounds silly, right? But it's actually harder than you think with a lot of providers.
It is, yeah. And in fact, with some of them, you can't customize that UI at all. So you can customize various login UIs, but with some of them, device code UI, you're stuck with what they give you. With this, I can do whatever I want. I could even have four individual blocks and use some JavaScript to put each character in each one and make it look cool like that. But you know, the other thing that I did there is I made that a 4-character uppercase alpha only code.
Yep.
Right. You can't necessarily always do that, and you know, Identity Server doesn't let you do that out of the box. But open source, it's on GitHub. You can see how it works. You can change it, and I've got other client projects where I've implemented our own algorithm for generating a code in a specific way. You just can't do that somewhere else, you know. So yeah, Identity Server. It's not really drawing a line. It's a spectrum, but yeah, really. It's quite, based on our own war stories, it's quite early in the process. If you identify anything that isn't vanilla, it's just like, let's just use Identity Server.
Yeah. But say with like all of the different auth flows that you've demonstrated today, I mean, taking away the fact that maybe you want to customize the UI down to each individual pixel or what have you, but all of those methodologies that you've shown now, we can safely assume they can probably do all of that with whatever auth provider they're currently using.
Everything that I showed you is part of OIDC.
Yep.
So if it's an OIDC compliant auth provider, you can do it.
Right. So they don't have to go and build their own identity server to get all of this.
Absolutely not. No.
Right.
No. I used Identity Server for the demo because for the reasons I explained, but no, you can do this with any of them.
Right. A couple more. So FIDO 2, FIDO. Had anyone ever heard of FIDO before today? Show of hands. All right. That pretty much mirrors me. I was like, never heard of it, right? FIDO. Okay. Who's using? How come when I go to like Netflix, I don't see a button to do like, you know, let's do passwordless sign in or anything like that? Is it actually around? Is it mature enough that people can safely adopt it?
Yeah. So who's using it? Good question. Well, Netflix should be, but the reason that they're not is because, you know, they're usually on a TV, so they probably find that device code flow is good enough for them. They just don't need it. Although they should, and everyone should, because it's that easy, right? In terms of who is using it, a lot of enterprises are using it. On a consumer basis, all of the big tech companies. So Google encourage you to use YubiKey. As far as they're concerned, that's what you're supposed to be doing. All of big tech, Facebook, Apple,
right.
Yeah.
So it's being used even though we might not see it. It's not obvious to us,
yeah.
Right?
So I say that it's not some breaking, magic new technology, but it is fairly new. Like it's only really been around since sort of 2018, 2019. And all those companies that I mentioned are part of the FIDO Alliance, so that's why they're using it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But you wouldn't have any sort of qualms about implementing FIDO into an enterprise app that you were building today, right? You would go,
Absolutely.
Yep, that's fine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. One other question that we had from the audience was you talked a lot about sort of client secrets in some of these flows, right? Question was, should you be storing them securely? Like how securely, like how secret is a secret when it comes to a client secret?
Yeah. So if this was a production application, I would probably have those in Key Vault, and I would have a UI for generating them and revoking them.
Right. Okay.
And usually you generate one, you show it once with a big warning saying, copy this to your clipboard now, because I'm never showing you this again. And then once you refresh the page and you come back, it's gone forever. And if you lose it, you have to expire it and generate a new one. So you should keep it. I mean, this is the thing: is a client secret is for use in a confidential client, and you've got to keep it confidential.
Right. That actually raises an interesting point where a lot of client secrets are on a fixed lifeline, right? Lifetime. They will expire 3 months, 6 months, a year down the track.
Yeah.
One of the things that businesses often enforce with passwords is the same sort of thing, right? A password expiry. Do you think that's effective?
No.
No?
Password expiry, the science is settled, to use a phrase. Password expiry is ineffective. And in fact, there was look, I've been at war with passwords for most of my career, so I've got some papers that I prepared on this for executives and stuff. And the specific statistic is that the logic behind expiring passwords, to actually make that effective, you have to change the password every 8 milliseconds.
Right.
So no, not effective, because no one's doing that.
Who here in their current job has to go through the rigmarole of like resetting their password every 30 days or 90 days or whatever? Yeah, right, there you go. You can take that back with 50%? You, right? Yeah, 50% of people, you can take that back and look, if we don't do this every 8 milliseconds, what even is the point? Yeah, look.
But, you know, there's another interesting use case for identity server there, right? So, you know, if you do want to expire it, you can automate that. You can build some API endpoints, and I haven't thought through the details. You still have to secure them somehow, but you could automatically rotate that. That's not something you can do with other identity providers. Yeah. And that's functionality you have to build. But yeah, pretty flexible.
Nice. The other question we had was, show me the code, where it is, where is it? But it's on GitHub. You've shown that already. So it's fully working. People can just F5 that thing and start poking around.
You can't quite F5 it.
Can't quite. I'm sure it has a README F5 experience.
It does, yeah. It has a README. Yeah.
Awesome. That's all the questions I could collect. Does anyone have any other questions from the audience tonight before we let Matt do the drive home? No? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was fantastic. As I said, it's always terrifying doing auth, so having someone sort of show you how to do it properly and how easy it can be to do properly is super valuable. And I look forward to your next talk, man.
Thanks, Luke. And thanks, everyone, for coming.
Cheers. And Matt has a book. Go read it if you do mobile development. It's really good. Does .NET MAUI. So as of 2 days ago, right?
Plug.
Yes.
Or desktop.
Or desktop. Yes, that's right. Cross-platform. Awesome. Thanks very much. Luke from SSW, Matt from SSW. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.